The right to protest, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment. Are there any restrictions? Well, let's take a look at this week's case. It involves a case that arose in Nebraska. And there was the Westboro Baptist Church. Now, the Westboro Baptist Church, as you may be aware, has an unusual, many people would say, belief that the United States is losing military men in battle as a result of embracing homosexuality. And therefore, whenever there's a military funeral, these folks show up with various protests contending that the death of the serviceman or woman was a result of the fact that the United States allows homosexuality, and they wear shirts and carry placards that say, "God hates fags." Well, they would show up at these military funerals and obviously would be a significant harassment to those who were burying a loved one, and many of whom were very grieved at the time and very vulnerable, and then to see this group show up and express their hatred towards, as they said, fags. Well, Nebraska passed a law, and they passed a law that said, if you're going to protest at a funeral site, you must be 500 feet away from the actual funeral service. All right. Well, one of the members of the Westboro Baptist Church filed suit, said that ordinance is unconstitutional. And one of the reasons it's unconstitutional is not only do we have a right to political speech, but we also have a right to be heard. And by having to be 500 feet away, those who are attending the funeral cannot hear our message as well. Well, this was argued at the U.S. District Court level, and it found its way up to the 8th District Court of Appeals. And there, at the 8th Circuit District Court, the court looked at this and heard the arguments, one saying free speech and one saying, wait a second. On the state side, we have a compelling state interest. The compelling state interest is to look after our citizens, particularly those who are grieving, those who are vulnerable, as they attend a service here in which they are basically burying their loved one. And that right to engage in that private period of time that's extraordinarily important is being interfered with by the protesters. Therefore, having this 500-foot buffer is a reasonable compromise between the right of free speech and the right of the privacy that these individuals need at this very vulnerable time. Well, the court heard these arguments, looked at both sides of this issue, and came away and sided with the state of Nebraska. And basically found that yes, there is a First Amendment right to protest, but if there is a legitimate, compelling state interest, that state interest must be considered. And in this instance, they did find that this was a reasonable compromise. The individuals who wanted to protest could still protest. The individuals who wanted to have some degree of privacy as they attended to this funeral would have that degree of privacy. As to the argument that was originally made by one of the members of the church that, well, if they're 500 feet away, their message could not be heard as well, one of the justices pointed out the First Amendment provides the right to free speech. It doesn't compel anyone to listen to that free speech. Okay, what did we learn from this case? We learned that in the First Amendment, an amendment that basically is almost sacred in the American tradition, there still is some compromise that must be made if there is a compelling state interest, and here we saw the demonstration of that compelling state interest. Okay, we bring in this case as we bring in cases every week so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.